Good morning, my beautiful people. I go by the name Sotadeology. In today's particular class, we're going to dissect what I call Sotadeology Lecture 22, Time, Energy, Wave Function, and FOE. Sotadeology Lecture 22, Time, Energy, Wave Function, and FOE. FOE stands for Formula of Everything. Now, time energy wave function is what I actually use to dissect the flipping mechanism. By deriving formula of everything, then by applying that formula of everything, I realized that there is this inherent phenomenon of flipping mechanism, which is somehow hidden. But the best way to actually, you know, to decipher that mystery is to use time energy wave function, and that is what I use by going deeply into the quantum mechanics to actually see what is going on. So now this particular tutorial or this class is going to be quite insightful and informative. So as you can see that I have the usual time energy wave model. The time energy wave model was actually, derived from the time energy wave function, which is, what we have down right here. So, but before we dive deeply into what this time energy wave function is all about, I want us to explore the publication of this research. Now, I need you to, when you look at what I have right here, you can see that the research was published on International Journal of Scientific. Okay, so now we have it back. So now you can see that it was published on International Journal of Scientific and Engineering Research, which is IJSER. Now the publication certificate is what you have right here. Now the title of this particular publication is Seeing the Anatomy of Quantum Gravity Through Formula of Everything. I published this after the prior publication of the time theory of the universe. In time theory of the universe, I derived formula of everything. In this particular paper, I applied that formula of everything, then derived time energy wave function to dissect that inherent phenomenon of flipping mechanism. Now, the flipping mechanism is what I call the signature of Almighty God. I call it the signature of Almighty God. You can see the title of this particular publication right there. And so when we look at the evaluation section, you can see significance of contribution. So we have that to be 3. Originality of content, we have that to be 4. Technical quality, we have that to be 4. Then clarity of presentation, we have that to be 4. So now you can see the stamp and the signature. You can see everything right there. So now this paper, you can actually get it on www.ijser.org. You can get it on that particular website. So now, that being said, now I want us to move to the main issue. I want us to move to the main issue. So now you can see that the title of this diagram reads as the discovery of flipping mechanism as signature of Almighty God. So now when you look at this time energy wave model, you can see that we have curvature of time trajectory, which is this, to the curvature of energy trajectory. So inside the formula of everything, we have this nested linear solution, and as a result of that, we have this equilateral triangle. This is the constancy of gravity, and then this is the reaction of that as constancy of light. And so we have this annihilation of suspended zero to bridge the gap. So from the diagram alone, you can see that we have this divergence of quantum mechanics to classical mechanics, which we're able to bridge by annihilating suspended zero. And then you can see that the trajectory, the vertical trajectory that signifies the instant trajectory of time, is far beyond the limit of equilateral triangle. It actually travels into higher dimension, and that transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension is what I call complex system, and you can call it complex system transition. So now, this is just the visual representation of what we're going to, dissect today, because what we're trying to do is to unravel, this visual representation. But by having it like this, you will have the picture of what we're to discuss in this today's class. Okay, so now the first thing I did was to derive formula of everything. So what I was trying to do was to actually model the relationship between time, energy, and mass. What kind of relationship do we have between time, energy, and mass? Now, based on the derivation, I then get to know that it's an inverse relationship. We have inverse relationship between time and energy. We have inverse relationship between energy and mass. We have inverse relationship between time and mass. So now, for me to capture the three elements, should I say element, time, energy, mass? Well, let me say element. For me to capture the three elements, we have to use chain rule, differential calculus. I'm going to use differential calculus, then use chain rule. So now you can see the model right here, which is the t the m equal to the t the e times the e the m. So now for t is a function of m, let t equal to e squared. For t is the function of e, which is energy, where e equal to m squared plus 1. Therefore, E equal gm, because E is the gravitational function of mass. So now thus T equal E squared. And so we can have it to be in parentheses m squared plus 1 squared. So now the T, the E, will give us 2 times 1e raised to power 2 minus 1, and that will be 2e. Then the T, the the E, the M will be 2 times 1m raised to power 2 minus 1, and that will give us 2m. So by chain rule, we have the T, the M equal to the T, the E times the E, the M. And so we're going to have 2E times 2M equal to 4EM. Therefore, we're going to have it by, by substituting the placeholder, which we have to be m squared plus 1, we're going to have dt dm equal to 4, then in parentheses m squared plus 1, then m. So by the time we open the bracket, we're going to have 4m squared plus 4m. Now, the 4m squared plus 4m is what I call strong conveying placeholder for 4m squared, while the 4m is weak conveying placeholder. With that, we have this framework for strong nuclear force, and then we have framework for weak nuclear force. So now to induct E equals mc squared as E in our 4em of 4 in parentheses m squared plus 1, then m outside, then m outside. So m outside placeholder, then comma, let t equal to E squared for t is the function of E, where E equals, square bracket m dot c squared, then squared. So we're going to use the gravitational speed of sun instead of the mass worth of any heavenly bodies, because all other heavenly bodies, they orbit, they actually revolve around sun, and so we're going to use the gravitational speed of sun. So that will serve as generic gravitational field, and that is 274. The value is 274 as we have it here. Then the speed of light, which is approximately 3.0 times 10 raised to power 8. So the speed of sun's gravitational force and the speed of light will be what we're going to use. So then we have the t the m equal to 4em, and so by the time we replace that with our placeholder, we're going to have it to be 4. We open parentheses, then we open square bracket parentheses. We have mc squared, m times c squared, then we square that plus 1, then outside the bracket we have m. dt the m equal 4, then we're going to put the gravitational speed of sun right there, which is 274. Then in parentheses we have the speed of light, 3.0 times 10 raised to power 8. We close the bracket, squared, then close square bracket, we square that plus 1. Outside the bracket we have m. Now dt the m equal to 4, then we have the gravitational speed. So when we square the speed of light, we have it to be 9.0 times 10 raised to power 16. We close the bracket, we square that plus 1. Then outside the bracket we have m. Then dt the m equal to 4. So by the time we multiply the 274 with 9.0 that we have and we square that, we have it to be 6.3 times 10 raised to power 38. We close the square bracket, then plus 1. Outside the bracket we have m. Now dt the m equal to, inside the parentheses, 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39 plus 4. Then outside the bracket we have m. When we now open the bracket, we have dt the m to be 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39m plus 4m. So now the 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39, that is the constant speed of the universe. So what we're going to use with this formula is to expand, to model the expansion of the universe per every entity of the universe. So basically what this is telling us is that every entity, every object that you have in the universe, when it is being localized to be that object that you can interact with, it has right within it, just as we have for this mass energy equivalence, E equal to mc squared. So right inside the instantiation, you have the entire of the universe. So when you have this object, when you have the object to move up to the speed of light, then the object will be transformed in such a way that it would then become worth instead of mass. And then basically every object has the full potential, which is to be everywhere, and then it has the localized potential, which is to be instantiated at a particular spot. So basically, we now have this. We can actually replace the constant speed of the universe with capital U, and so we now have it to be dt dm equal to capital Um plus 4m. So now this formula, the way we use it is you can actually use the mass worth, the quantum mass worth, to get its classical counterpart. You can use the classical mass worth to get its quantum counterpart. And then we can actually use this formula to track the rate of decay right from quantum level up to the classical level, or from the classical level down to the quantum level. But then when this formula is applied, we discover something that is so profound. We realize that when you, for instance, let's say you specify the quantum mass worth, which is electron, and that is 9 point. So let's say that is the value that we have right here. If that is the value that we have right here, which is 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 31. Now this, you have it in kilogram. If we should put that in the place of the 2 m's that we have in the formula of everything, the 2 m's, then what we're going to get will be the classical counterpart, which is going to be this value, 2,277,250,000 kilogram. That is the classical counterpart. But then let's say we want to specify this classical mass worth in the formula so as to reconfirm the quantum mass worth, which is electron. By the time we do that, the answer that we're going to get is going to be this value, which is 5.7 times 10 raised to power 48. But then when you now expand this value in standard form, then you will realize that the mass worth of the weak conveying force is being suspended to the strong conveying force. And that is what we have right here in this region, the red spirally formulated, or let me say spirally formulated convergence. That is what we have right here. But then we can then get to see that the trajectory is diagonal as what we have, which is this, because the suspension that we have is going to be the base value of the quantum mass worth, but it's not going to be in form of 9.109. It's going to be 9,109. 9,109. And with that, we know that the trajectory will be diagonal as this. And so the classical realm is where we have this dashed horizontal line to where we have the curvature of time, while the quantum realm is where we have this dashed horizontal line down to where we have energy curvature. So now we know the trajectory is at classical level, but then we know that what we have is the action in time. Then there must be a reaction of that in energy. And so the reaction of that will be this other opposing diagonal trajectory that we have. and then you can see that is the constancy of light. So the value will be the same with what we have up right here. You can see that we have 5.7 times 10 raised to power 32. So the weak conveying force is being suspended at 32nd position. So we have many zeros suspending the weak value, which is the value of 4m. The value that is being suspended is the value of 4m. The strong value is the value of capital UM. So now we have reaction of that momentum in energy. So our equilateral triangle is almost formed, but then we need to manually annihilate the suspended zero. And when we do that, we're going to have this vertical trajectory. So we're going to have that vertical trajectory. But then to manually annihilate, all we have to do is just to take the value, the suspended value, take it over the suspended worth. The suspended value, we take it over the suspended interval. And so it's going to be 9,109 all over 10 raised to power 32. So when you expand that, then we're going to have 9.109 times 1 all over 10 raised to power 32. So when we solve that further, it will give us 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. So now you can see that the value that we got is not the same thing as the initial value, which is 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 31. So now the value that we got, we can see that value is smaller to the initial worth, and that means that the trajectory, the vertical trajectory, is being shifted forward into the black hole. Now this region is the expanding cosmological space, while this is the contracting phase of black holes. Now this diagram represents the entirety of the universe. So when you have a value of any object in the universe and you put it inside the formula of everything, you can actually get the full potential of that object and then get the localized potential of the object. You can get to track the relationship of that object to its classical counterpart, then the relationship of the classical counterpart to it. But then we realize that the relationship is always forward in time. The momentum is always forward in time. And then from what you have seen, you see that we have the vertical trajectory, this vertical trajectory being shifted into the black hole. And so there is this decay effect on that value, and that is why it is so reduced to that value. But then the point is this: we know that this vertical trajectory is actually being maintained. And if we relate that that result that we just got, if we relate that to, the present phase, because the one we have gotten now has been shifted into the future. So if we relate that to the past, which is the present phase, then we can see that we now can relate it to the initial worth. Now this is where the problem is, and that is why I'm going to now derive time energy wave function to see what the problem is, to really get the true nature of the problem. But then the issue is this: we have this transition, which is also the same thing as quantum entanglement. And the reason we could, have quantum entanglement and yet still have, the speed of light to be the speed limit of the universe is for the fact that quantum entanglement is a transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension. And that is why it could transmit information instantly. Because when you put this particular value, the inverse curvature of energy value, if you put this value and you supply it inside the formula of everything, then you'll be able to track, you'll be able to track the mass accumulation right inside this compacted equilateral triangle. So this compacted equilateral triangle is what I called quantum nucleus. It is quantum nucleus, and that is only place where you could, have instantiation of electron. Electron is quite undefined when it is in that cloudy sphere. When it is in cloudy sphere, electron is undefined. The only place where electron could be defined will be right inside the quantum nucleus, which is the compacted equilateral triangle. So when you have this equilateral triangle of the past, and then you have the equilateral triangle of the future, if you restructure it vertically such that you have it being stacked on each other, then we're going to have the suspension around the edges of the stacked equilateral triangles, and that would give us these compacted equilateral triangles. And so we're going to have constantly accelerated momentum. Don't forget that we are actually negotiating the most curved region of the energy curvature, and that will increase momentum. But then the momentum has to be treated more or less like, the kind of phenomenon that you have when you're on a treadmill. On a treadmill, you'll be running, you know that you're running, but your running cannot be translated to moving from one place to another. That is the kind of phenomenon that we have right inside the nucleus, the quantum nucleus. So now, when you use that value, you'll be able to see the accumulation of mass worth, which I call arbitrary mass worth, because even at that point in time, the mass worth of electron is still undefined. You can see one empty circle right there. So the mass worth of electron is still undefined. But then the accumulation, the slight accumulation of the mass worth will actually allow for the curvature of that momentum to align with the curvature of energy, and then we're going to have standing wave. Standing wave is a kind of static wave. And once we have that standing wave, that will project momentum into higher dimension. And it is then that we can have connection to the electron of the higher dimension, which will be instantly flipped or converted to positron. So now once that is converted to positron, then we can have the instantiation of the substrate's electron. So the phenomenon is quantum entanglement. So information can be transmitted instantly, and it is only when information is transmitted instantly that you can get to know the genuine position of electron to its counterpart at higher dimension, and it is then you can get to know the position of electron to the classical mass worth. And so the feedback from the complex system or from the higher dimension, the instant feedback is what I call objective conscious experience. If you want to know more about consciousness, you can actually watch the videos I uploaded earlier. So that is just the explanation. But now, what we are now trying to decipher is to get the situation of things. Why is it that we were unable to, reconfirm the mass worth of electron? But then by this diagram, we already know why we can't reconfirm, because the trajectory, the vertical trajectory is the instant trajectory of time. And then the trajectory has to be applied once. So you can see that we use quantum mass worth to get the classical counterpart. So we have traversed that trajectory that one time, but using the classical mass worth to reconfirm the quantum mass worth, that is, traversing the trajectory the second time. But then the phenomenon that we have there is synonymous to having nuclear fission. Now, take for instance, when you have, let's say we want to bombard the nucleus of uranium with neutron. So the moment we inject the neutron into that nucleus, the nucleus will be almost instantly big. It will be big almost instantly, but then it will be so unstable, and then the nucleus will split into two. And so we will then have krypton and barium. So now that is the kind of that is the kind of situation that we have right there. We have this addition, we have this instantiation of the real electrons mass worth, but it is just like that of the nuclear fission, that it gets reduced to the value that we get, and by having it being reduced as such, it is being injected into the substrate, and then it is being shifted into the black hole. So now that is the kind of situation that we have, but then we just want to know what is actually going on. So now we have to go to the quantum level. Don't forget that this formula of everything will allow us to actually, though we can use quantum mass worth to move from quantum level to classical level, but majorly it is structured such that we use classical mass worth to retrieve the quantum counterpart. But the most important thing is that we can use whatever it is that we know to get what we don't know, and you understand. So now, but there is something I want to quickly say before we proceed to derivation of time energy wave function. And that thing is, you can see that the mass worth of electron is being reduced to 9.109 times 10 raised to power minus 32. So we have difference of -1 right there. But then I think, let me just say we have difference of 1 right there. So now that difference of 1 that we have at the power level, when you put that value inside the formula of everything, then you will then get to see that the classical mass worth will have been decayed down to about 277,275,000 kilograms, almost about 2 billion worth of classical mass worth is being decayed. So now we can use our results to track, the relationship between the classical decaying mechanism and quantum decaying mechanism. Okay, that being said, now let's go to derivation of time energy wave function. Time energy wave function, what I'm trying to do right here is just to, model the whole situation in such a way that there is no, I don't want to have a imaginary number h bar right inside the momentum. I want to see if I can model it without that I and h bar, and then get to see something that is, similar to that. So now you can see the symbol that I use is called del. So when you multiply that with electric field, I have electric field. I just want to get what electric field is. So now when you multiply that with electric field, then the momentum you're going to get will be minus dt the E, which is the derivation of time to energy. So the divergence of time to energy will give us the, electric field as we have it right here. Now, don't forget that I'm not actually, another thing you can note right here is that I'm not using partial derivation. I don't want to use partial derivation because I want to model the whole situation as it is being relativistically connected to each other. So I want to have the momentum the way it is in the universe and see what I can get. Okay, so now, but then the reason I'm doing this, the reason I want to have it like this, let me quickly go down here so that you can see the reason I want to model everything like that. If you read what I have right here, which says, look at what I have here. I call it axiomatic condition for reality. Then it says, observation and experience are the two means by which one can obtain reality. It turns out that either of the two cannot ascertain reality when relativity is involved. Then it goes on by saying, on the other hand, there is no emergent reality without relativity. So what is the implication of that? It means that observation is delusional of reality relative to the experience based on localization. Meanwhile, experience is delusional of reality relative to observation based on globalization. Now, what will now be the solution? The solution is this: potential solution of reality. By the condition, localization and globalization must cohorts. I forgot to put O there, cohorts. That is, they must coexist. Experience and observation must be unified via static and undulating field. So now, static and undulating field, this vertical trajectory is what I call static and undulating field. This is static and undulating field. Because that is the trajectory of time. Like I often, in my videos, I usually say that time has two identities and energy has two identities as well. Time by default is instant, but when time is in relativistic scaling with energy, it becomes continuous. Then energy, on the other hand, by default is infinite. When energy is in relativistic scaling with time, then it becomes discrete. So we need to have that at the back of our minds. So now, we now know that we cannot, because partial derivation would allow you to make other variables to be constant while you deal with one. But in this model, in this time energy wave function, I want to have the momentum the way it is in the universe and then try to see what I can get. So that's why I have it like this. So now, then del times, in parentheses, del times electric field equal to, then I have negative derivation of del times T over derivation of energy. So now, del times, in parentheses, del times electric field equal to minus 1 all over capital U squared. Don't forget the constant speed of the universe is capital U, as we have for formula of everything. So I put that there. I want to stretch the expansion up to that constant speed of the universe. So I have it to be negative 1 all over capital U squared. Then second derivation of time over second derivation of energy. So now, don't forget that here we have, the curvature by having the second derivation. So it will actually be moving towards the contraction phase of the universe, which is the black hole. But then when you read what I have here, it says electric field is the divergence of time relativistic scaling to energy at constant capital U squared. So now that is what I just modeled right here. But then we're going to proceed with this and then see what we get further. So now the next thing I want to do is to integrate vector structure in order to have the wave equation from 2-dimension into 3-dimension. And for us to do that, then we have to implement what we have below. So don't forget that by applying formula of everything, by applying this formula of everything, we have the phenomenon of moving from substrate dimension. Now, this whole diagram, this is the substrate dimension, but then we have transition right here into higher dimension. So I just have to model that and see what that can result to. So now I have del times, in parentheses, del times capital T equal to del in parentheses times del times capital T minus del squared capital T. Now this capital T will serve as a placeholder vector. You understand? And so we can then apply as follows. So then I have del in parentheses del times electric field, and so minus del squared times electric field. You have to model the momentum of electric field relative to the momentum of time scaling, the inverse momentum of time scaling to energy. That's what I'm doing right here. So now equal to minus 1 all over capital U squared, then second derivation of T to second derivation of energy. So now we have it being properly modeled like that. But then you see that the inverse relationship of time to energy, that is what constitutes the electric field. That's what constitutes the electric field. Now, what we have right here is just, what should I call it? Should I say ambient energy structure without strong mass convergence? That's what we have right here. So what we have, you can see that at this level, we have the electric field to be equal to the inverse scaling of time to energy, which is basically what we have, the symmetric nature of the equilateral triangle as we have it right here. You can see. So then it means that electric field is actually symmetric to inverse relationship of time to energy. So now the thing is this. Don't forget that I call this vertical trajectory, I call it static and undulating field. It's a field on its own, but it's a field that travels across all other dimensions. You can see that the field is not even stopping at the limit of equilateral triangle, then it progresses into the higher dimension. So now the thing is, this field is the field of reality. The static and undulating field is the field of reality. So now when you look at it literally, let's even dissect it literally by saying, here we have expanding cosmological space, and here we have contracting phase of black holes. But then, will it be possible for us to actually transit from a field that is propagating outwards to a field that is propagating inwards without having a transiting point where the propagation, the outwardly propagation of the initial momentum will be totally quenched or totally terminated for us to have the inverse of such propagation. So you can see that literally it only makes sense that we should have this transition, which is known as event horizon. We should have a field where we can have that static and undulating phenomenon. You understand? So by undulating, it means that the field is not void. It only means that the field is not void of momentum. So, but it's more or less like the pulsation of heartbeat. So it is not moving from one point to another, but we still have, momentum in that static field. So by being vertical means that the field is static. Then by the virtue of the elongation means that there is still kind of inherent momentum which is static, which is not, moving from one point to another. So, okay, so that being said, we now know that since the electric field is equal to the inverse relationship of time to energy, so the divergence of time to energy is equal to electric field as we have it. So we can just rearrange, take this whole right term to the left, and then by the time we solve that further, we're going to have this del squared multiplied with electric field minus 1 all over capital U squared. Then we have second derivation of time to second derivation of energy. So we can equate that to 0. And that means that the two terms commutate. Or rather, I say the two terms commute, you understand? So now, to solve for mass formation of particles as suspended in time relativistic scaling, we have to proceed with what we have below. But since the total energy for a relativistic particle with mass m, according to special relativity, is what we have below, the totality of total energy in special relativity is what we have below. Total energy squared equal to p squared c squared plus m squared c to the power of 4. That's what we have right there. But then we will need to integrate this into our equation. So the del squared but this time what we're trying to model is just to model the momentum of total energy. So we can just say we have second derivation of total energy minus 1 all over capital U squared, then second derivation of time to second derivation of energy. So we equal that to momentum and mass worth as we have right there. But then we have to replace the c, the speed of light, with capital U, which is the speed of the universe. So then I will have to introduce Planck constant because I want to track. Don't forget, by having second derivation, it means that we are actually moving towards the singularity of black hole. So I want to track the decaying mechanism in the black hole as being discrete, because it will be discrete because decaying we have to disconnect. The decaying of mass what we disconnect, there must be a kind of discontinuity in the momentum, and so I'm using the Planck constant. So I have 1 all over h squared, then open parenthesis p squared minus total energy squared over capital U squared plus m squared capital U squared. Now here you can see that I use capital U squared instead of raised to power 4 because we often have the cone of light, and that is why the only way we could measure the speed of light is by having multiple of its speed in time. So when you are having when you are having any object in motion in time, you must always have the multiple of such speed in time. That is why time is relative, not constant. So now we know that the measure of time has to be multiple of that. So the constant speed of the universe being in time will be multiple of that. So that's why I decided not to use that for. I want to reduce it to minimum level. I want to reduce it to minimum level and see what I can have, because there is a tiny spot where one can actually have a suspension, a kind of suspension that will not actually go into singularity, go into infinity. So that is what I'm trying to do here. So I have that to be what I have here. Good. So now if you read what I have here, it says that T is a placeholder for both electric field and the inverse relationship of time, which is second derivation of time to second derivation of energy. And so when we rearrange that, we can equate to that to 0. That's what I have up there. So now, then we can solve this further by, doing some rearrangement. We have to do some rearrangement. And so we have second derivation to second derivation of total energy minus 1 all over capital U squared, then second derivation of time to second derivation of energy. So now what we're trying to do is that this momentum, as we have it, should be equal to the other side. That's what we're trying to actually do with this. And so the other side, once the whole thing right here is being solved, then we have it to be. So now we have that to be dash minus capital U squared M squared all over H squared. Okay, so now I don't know if you get what is actually happening here. Now you can see that the moment we introduce mass, we're talking about relativistic mass worth right here. The moment we introduce mass, then we realize basically, I don't know what to call this. I can't call it relativistic mass, though it is relativistic mass, but there is a way we have this arbitrary mass worth that, constrains momentum in such a way that we have static momentum, just like, the one that is synonymous to being on treadmill, running without moving from one place to another. But then you see that the moment we introduce mass, then what we have at left side is not equal to what we have at right side again. But then let's go further. The next thing for us to do is just to capture the whole scenario to see what is happening. And the best way we can get to see that is to allow this equation to act on psi, and then, implement it as a vector system. So to do that, then we have our del squared. Now we are back to the del right now. We have our del squared psi, then in parentheses we have RT, which is the, vector form, minus M squared capital U squared over H squared. Multiply that with psi function, which is the wave function. Then we have the vector R, T equal to 1 all over capital U squared. Then we have second derivation of time to derivation of energy. I think this is going to be second derivation as well. So to derivation of energy, and so we have it acting on psi, which is wave function. Then we have r comma t. So now, by solving this further, we now see that since we are making this equation to act on psi, so we're going to run it in form of its momentum. So we have second derivation of psi all over second derivation of total energy minus m squared u, capital U squared, then all over h squared. Then we multiply that with psi, which is wave function, equal to 1 all over capital U squared. We multiply that with second derivation of time to second derivation of psi function. Now, you can see that there is a flipping mechanism right there. We have psi wave function at the top right up here relative to total energy. But then we have the wave function, we have the psi function down here relative to time trajectory. So clearly you can see that what we have here is synonymous to Mobius strip. Now, what we have here is not only synonymous to Mobius strip, it is as well synonymous to the remnant that one will get, the kind of remnant you get when you try to test the commutability of momentum to position. So you see that by trying to test the commutability of position to momentum, what you will get will be the difference that you are going to get is going to be this I h bar, which is not equal to 0. And that is why momentum is not commutative with position. Now, the phenomenon is what we now have right here, that flipping mechanism. Even though I did not use iota, which is imaginary number, and I did not use h bar in the derivation, you can see that this whole thing is still pointing to that complex system. It's pointing to the complex system. And so now you can see what we have there is complex system. But then we now realize that the moment mass is involved, then the left side of the equation is no more equal with the right side of the equation. So now we have two types of infinity. The left side of the equation has one kind of infinity, and the right side has another type of infinity. So I will use another diagram to explain that further. So basically, this is actually supporting it's supporting the application of formula of everything. It's supporting the application of formula of everything because when you reiterate the application of formula of everything further, then you get to see that you will get into the core singularity of the black hole, where you can get a remnant of electron to be 1.1. If you consider that 1.1 remnant of electron base to the present phase where we're able to get instantiation of electron and its counterpart, then the ratio is going to be 1 over 1.1. So definitely the convergence that we have in the singularity of the black hole is different from the convergence that we have in the singularity of the Big Bang. So now, formula of everything is telling us that the convergence of the Big Bang is different from the convergence of the black hole singularity. So now that is actually supporting that. So we now know that we have asymmetric nature right inside the symmetric nature of the universe. So now the next thing that we're going to dissect is what I have right here. Because the best way, there are two things that one cannot actually take away from. There are some things that one cannot do without in quantum physics and yes, in quantum physics. The first one is uncertainty principle. Uncertainty principle, it's something that gets emergent out of the system of the universe. And yet there is another one, which is complex system. Complex system too is a kind of emergent phenomenon out of the system of the universe. And so no one can get rid of imaginary number. Imaginary number, it's a real worth at higher dimension. And it is when you now have the relationship of that imaginary number with real number of the substrate dimension, that is when we have this flipping mechanism that must be injected into the substrate dimension for us to get the reality of what we're trying to portray. So now, it is for that reason I want to briefly talk about the non-commutative nature of position to momentum. So right now, Einstein, Podolsky, I don't know if I got it right, and Rosen, three of them, they were scientists. They published one book in 1935, EPR paper. And so in that paper, they were trying to portray what reality should be. And finally, they later concluded that quantum mechanics is incomplete. So we're going to dissect what they propose for us to, test for the compatibility or test for the commutative nature of position and momentum and see and try to get the fact they are trying to point at. Okay, so now they propose that in a complete theory, there is an element corresponding to each element of reality. Sufficient condition for the reality of a physical quantity is the possibility of predicting with certainty without disturbing the system. Now, looking at what they proposed, we can see that that proposition is somehow, because there is no way you try to measure something at quantum level that you will not disturb the system. So now, however, the act of observing quantum system to measure its outcome disturbs the system. Therefore, quantum mechanics is incomplete. So that is then their own final conclusion. So now let's try and test the commutability or the commutative nature of position and momentum. The position and momentum operators do not commute, and so we can actually write that to be x at p at not equal to p at x at. When you flip, now you see that there is no way we even talk about momentum, that there is no way there will be any form of momentum from one spot to another in the universe, that there will be no injection of a flipping mechanism. Now, when you look at what we have right here, we have x at P hat not equal P hat X hat. So X hat P hat is being flipped to have P hat X hat. So now consider the commutator of X hat and P hat. And so we should have the system to be X hat P hat minus P hat X hat when that is being flipped. And so the X hat can actually serve as position to be X, and P hat can serve as momentum. And for it to happen like that, the parameter will be minus I multiplied with H bar, derivation, partial derivation to partial derivation of X. Once we have this like this, we know that there is flipping mechanism that is being introduced to this. So the momentum must be inversely related to the position, not even the position as such, must be inversely related to the momentum of position. That is what we have right here. And so, based on formula of everything, it is telling us that the position to momentum will create relativity, which means that there will be central point between the position and momentum, so that when position is approaching momentum, it will do so at equal speed as momentum is approaching position. That is relativity for you. And so now we have our X hat, P hat. We have it to act on psi. And by so doing, we then have it to be minus I H bar X, partial derivation of psi to partial derivation of X. So now the flipped version of that, we have it to act on psi, and then we have that to be minus IH bar partial derivation to partial derivation of X. Then in parentheses, we now have X multiplied with psi. Now, the product rule of differentiation will actually allow us to have a different factor of IH bar. So now, when we now conduct product rule on this, then we're going to have it to be minus IH bar square bracket X partial derivation of psi over partial derivation of X plus psi. So now, so we can then have our, since we have the two terms separately as that, we can just group them together and subtract them by putting them in the square bracket. We now have X at P at minus P at X at, then they will act on psi. So now we have minus IH bar X, then partial derivation of psi to partial derivation of X. So the negative sign will turn to plus, and then we have IH bar, then we still have the same term, and then plus psi. We close the term. So by the time we get rid of the term that we have, what we'll be left with will now be IH bar acting on psi. So now we can see that our X hat and P hat, we can see that the result is IH bar, which is not the same thing as 0. So what this is telling us is that at classical level, the H bar is so insignificant, and that is why we have what I call close to reality. We have, close proximity to reality at classical level. I know you might be wondering that what is it that I'm saying? Yes, that is it, because we must actually have this instant feedback from complex level before we can even be conscious of whatever it is that we are conscious of at classical level. But it will not be as if it's happening because we are already close to reality. You understand? So that is what we experience. Classical mechanics is as incomplete as quantum mechanics. But then at quantum level, the H bar is too huge to cause, the H bar is so huge and it causes uncertainty principle. And that is why we could only settle for probability density at quantum level. So now at complex level is where we have H bar being real. H bar is so balanced to assume its real worth, and that is when it can actually toggle with imaginary number for us to have that complex system and for us to have that flipping mechanism. So that is that. So that is that. But then down here we have time energy wave model structure right here. So now from that you can get to see that at complex level we have this certainty, but at quantum level we have uncertainty. At classical level we have close to certainty. So now the instant transmission of information at higher dimension the instant transmission, the complex system that we have, which serves as transition of substrate dimension to higher dimension, that is where we have genuine reality. And so instant transmission of that as feedback to quantum mechanics and to classical mechanics, we ascertain what is known as consciousness. So it's until when we are conscious of whatever it is that we're doing, that is when we actually, obtain reality. So that is that. So then when we look at that verdict of instant transmission of information, we can get to see that what I said right here is the same thing. You can see that what I said here is the solution by saying that by saying that localization and globalization must cohort, experience and observation must be unified via static and undulating field. So what that is telling us is that somehow weird, but when we look at it critically, we can get to know that indeed that is the solution. That is the solution. There is no other solution. By saying that we know quantum mechanics is global and we know classical mechanics is local. By saying that the localization of classical mechanics and the globalization of quantum mechanics must coexist, then it means that there is a point where we should be able to have the two, and that is the point of where we have static and undulating field. So it is not so weird when we look at it critically. Now, take for instance, at complex level, we have instant transmission of information, and no information can be transmitted without any local instantiation from one point to another. Even though the transmission happens as if there is no spacing between the 2 points, then the two localized points must be in existence. With that, you can get to know that both localization and globalization are already in place when we then have the instant transmission of information. Now we can see that the solution that we now get is to have instant transmission of information. So I don't need to go through everything that I have here. You are so conversant with this axiomatic condition for reality, and you are conversant with the potential solution of reality. But let me quickly just go through this overview insight of reality. What is it that we can call quantum and what is it that we can call classical? Let's look at this scenario. A man on earth, by being in contact with earth, which is experience, will observe the earth to be flat. But by moving away from the earth to a certain distance, which is observation, he will then observe the earth to be spherical. If he should go further into space such that earth becomes a tiny dot relative to its position in space, given that the earth moves away at equal speed to that of the man, only then is the tiny dot of earth is quantum. Can you please take note of that? Only then is the tiny dot of earth is quantum relative to the position of that man as classical. However, if the man should travel further into space such that the tiny earth is out of his sight, given that the lost earth can be located by the man at the instant speed, only then is such transition from the known realm to the unknown realm is complex. Now, with that, we can get to know what quantum is. We can get to know what classical is. We can get to know what complex is. And that is what is being solved right here. We know that when you are on Earth, you might just conclude that the Earth is flat. But when you move away from the Earth to a certain distance, by being in such distance to Earth, then you are observing the Earth. When you observe the Earth, you'll be able to see the totality of the Earth, and then you'll be able to get the reality of Earth as Earth is. But then you are being deluded of the reality of the people on Earth. So there is this trade-off sacrifice. You get reality of one at the expense of reality of the other, but the only solution will come when you then move away from the Earth such that the Earth is out of sight. Only then it is imperative for you, only then it is inevitable that you must travel at this default speed of time, which is instant. Because you can see that when relativity is in place, then you get reality at one side, but get deluded at the other side. That is what is being represented right here. At the point where we have standing wave, we have genuine contact with the positron at higher dimension, but then when you relate that to the position of the classical mass world, you can see that classical mass world is being suspended to where it's supposed to be, which is the equilibrium point of time energy trajectory. So classical mass world is being suspended to the point of time intersection to energy. And that is why subjective conscious experience is needed to relocate classical mass world to where it's supposed to be. So now, at complex level, we have genuine contact. At classical level, we have suspension. So now, when you have, that is why I said no emergent reality without relativity. Even with relativity, what must you have to then have solution? That is why we have the whole thing settling for instant transmission of information. So by the virtue of instant transmission of information, then that information can actually reach the classical mass world at its exact position relative to the position of the positron in the higher dimension, or relative to the position of electron right at the quantum level. So now we can get to see that instant transmission is the solution right here. So now let's look at the reason we have two different types of infinities. When you look at this, if you have natural numbers, you can never exhaust natural numbers. So if somebody tells you that he has reached the highest or the biggest natural number, you can just ask the person to add 1 to that biggest natural number by having this formula, which is 2n plus 1. Then the number will continue, and by having that, we have what is known as infinite notation. And when you look at the formula, you see that what you have as infinite notation is the same thing as odd number. But how can you get to have finite notation? Now, if you have a natural number, how can you have a proper subset of that natural number? It's only when you have proper subset of the natural number that you can say you have finite notation. So we can have this formula, which is 2n minus 1. And then when you dissect this further, you see that what you have here is also the same thing as odd number. But then the transiting notation will then be even number, which is 2n. That will be the point where the entirety or the symmetric nature of the curvature is being exhausted. But then when we look at this, what you call finite notation is the same thing as infinite, because your finite notation is odd, while your infinite notation is also odd, but they are two different odds. Now, this initial finite notation will give you a kind of odd number that starts from 1. So when you say 2 times 1, you have it to be 2. When you minus 1 from it, you have 1. So when you say 2 times 2, you have 4. When you minus 1 from it, you have 3. So this odd starts from 1. But when you look at this odd, it starts from 2. So when you say 2 times 1, you have 2. You plus 1 to that, and that gives you 3. So this particular notation doesn't start from 1. So that is the difference, and that is why we could have two different infinities, like I said before. So now here we can say in the core singularity of the Big Bang we have energy density, while in the core singularity of the black hole we have mass density. So that is that. I will put a link to my research publication in the description below. You can click to explore it further. I believe this particular tutorial is quite informative. Don't forget, this is Sotadeology lecture 22, time, energy, wave function, and formula of everything. Thank you. God bless you.